I'm George Curtis. Welcome to It's Your Environment. Each week it's my privilege to bring guests that teach all of us about our environment. We have a little unusual setting today. We're on Highway E, about 4 miles north of Ripon. We're along the west edge of Rush Lake. I've known about Rush Lake for more than 50 years when I moved to the Oshkosh area, and was advised by a friend and a classmate that if you want game, if you want waterfowl, if you want to see a nice natural place for birds to nest and live and migrate, try Rush Lake. That proved to be good advice. We bought a property on Rush Lake, and since then we've bought a half dozen others, turned them over to easements for conservation purposes, and still live on Rush Lake after more than 50 years. That's the fun part of my story. The rest of the story is, during the 50 years that I've been a part of Rush Lake, it has gone downhill. It has gone downhill terribly in many ways, and we're going to have some guests with you today that can tell us a little bit about what's happened and what we can do if we can still do something to rectify it. My first guest is Tom Traxler. I've known him since he was probably 6 years old. He's an environmentalist. He's in the rehab business of plants, remediating plants to native species, and he's a wildlife guy, a dog trainer, but otherwise he's okay. Tom, welcome to the show.
How you doing, George?
What are your observations about Rush Lake?
Well, you know, I was part of this from day one when they formed this group to do restoration out at Rush Lake, and you know, nobody really had any ideas how to really do it, and they did a lot of gambling out there, and well, the gambling didn't pay off. But I think after listening and seeing the information they have out there today, what they plan on doing, I think is a lot more in tune of what we should have done a long time ago. So I got hope for the lake.
Well, we had some problems at the beginning. It wasn't perfect. We had a lead problem. People have been shooting ducks and geese on Rush Lake for 150 years, and that's a lot of lead. And in certain circumstances, when the northern birds would come down late and they would have open water, there were lead poisoning. Some years 1,000 or more birds would die. That was a problem. Then eventually we had carp. And what effect did the carp have on the water?
Well, they stirred up the bottom, brought more of the lead shot back up to a higher level for the waterfall. They also had too high of water, which is not always good for a lake like that, which caused a lot of bogs lift off the bottom to expose even more lead. And we actually lost some of the flora and fauna out on the lake, and it's being overran by really cattails and carp. Now, I know they did some carp killing out there, and I guess that worked, but now they're going to be focusing on the cattails.
Well, the plants are important. Explain that. That's your field.
Well, the plants are important to stabilize, to cleanse the water, but in this case, we have native and non-native plants growing together out there. You got native cattails and you got non-native cattails. And the plan is to get rid of the non-native and let the natives take their place back again in the lake bed. And hopefully by getting rid of the non-natives, the seed bank will actually activate. We can bring back the Strupus acutus, which was really the main plant in the lake, which would be your common hardstem bulrush. So that's the game plan for this year with them, and I actually want to be part of it.
Well, the plants play a role in the quality of the water, and they play a role in terms of what birds they sustain. Can you explain that a little more?
Well, every plant has hosts that use them, and vice versa. Rush Lake typically had hardstem bulrush and Typholatifolia, the big broadleaf cattail, which attracted the big marsh yellow-headed blackbirds. Those have disappeared off that lake because of the habitat being degraded. Low water, they had the water very low for a while. That activated the seed bank, and it was supposed to activate the hardstem, but the cattails took over. But on top of that, by having low water, they actually made it very tough for the muskrat that feeds upon the cattails to keep it in check, and this is why they have to do what they have to do to get rid of the cattails now.
Do you think the low water caused the muskrat to freeze out?
Absolutely. They need open water, and for them to really do their job, they have to have high water, which only the broadleaf cattail could survive in. By low water, the smaller species, non-native species, have taken over, and the cattails got exploded actually out on the mud flats out there.
Now
I think over behind your place, it really got pretty bad now.
It is bad. It is bad. In the 50-some years I've been an owner of property on Rush Lake, it's gone downhill every year, and so I must have some responsibility for it.
Well, we all do. You know, you're not farming. I know farming has a big impact, you know, with non-point pollution, manure, and such, and the chemicals. But yeah, it's everybody's problem if we want to look at it that way.
You're in the plant business, the native plant business. Explain that, if you would, Tom.
Yeah, we own and operate the largest aquatic nursery in the United States. We specialize in wetland mitigation and these large projects like Rush Lake and Lake Butamore. You were part of that too, Carroll's Island.
Sure.
And I'm on a project in Adams County, Lake Camelot. They have now had the blue-green algae problem because they're out there cutting weeds all the time with the weed eaters for the boaters. And eventually, if you don't have the plants in the water to do the filtration, settling of the soils and such, you're going to have these problems. So.
Well, thanks for what you've been doing, Tom, and thanks for being on the show. And you and I are going to have to do better the next 50 years than we did the last 50.
Well, I'm hoping another 50.
All right.
Nice seeing you again. Thank you.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Environment. I'm George Curtis, and I have a new guest, Brett Helmbrecht. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, George.
Since you have been active on Rush Lake, so many more people have been involved, so many more people are aware. Tell us exactly what your office is, and I know you're not limited to your office because you're telling people about Rush Lake and its problems and what can be done about them all the time, aren't you?
Yeah, so I moved to the area in 2008, but I'm no stranger to marshes. I grew up hunting and being out on the Horicon Marsh, and when I moved to town, it was right after the original restoration project was done. So what we found in the last 10 years, and currently I'm the president of Rush Lake Watershed Restoration, we're all volunteers, and we found that our old lake management plan doesn't do a lot for us in the current state of the lake. So why we're here today, we're working to redevelop the plan. We're doing that with a lot of studies out in the field and hoping to get everybody's input through our public questionnaire, because that really tells us what we should be working on. What does everyone want us to do? That's what we're going to go after.
All of us old guys want to talk about the good old days, and that's fine to a point. But the good old days aren't what we're facing today. At one time when I came here and bought my first property on Rush Lake, the water was clear. My kids actually swam in it. We took dogs out in it without any concern of them getting sick. We fished in it. The fish tasted good. The DNR actually used it for planting little fish and harvesting them and distributing throughout the state. And we had fantastic birds. Not just the birds you shoot at, although there were lots of those. We had all kinds of birds. It just was the most wonderful concentration of wildlife I've ever seen. And I have a responsibility. I participated in the next 50 years, and it's been 2 steps backward and 1 step forward. Give us a little bit of that history.
Sure. So the lake was in really rough shape 15 years ago, which was why they had to do the original restoration, which in short was drawing the lake down for 2 years and building a new dam to better regulate the water level. And that was supposed to do a lot of good things for the lake, some of which did happen. The water quality is great now. I'm the guy that goes out and collects the water samples both in the lake and the streams. And what the lake sample results tell us is the water's got really great numbers for phosphorus, and the test that tells you what algae is doing, it's extremely low. And that means it's the lake like you talked about. Kids can swim in it, dogs can swim in it without worried about being sick. It's a great place to be. We do the tributary sampling too. Those numbers are tested for phosphorus and they're a little bit higher, but because the lake samples are so good, it tells us that the vegetation in the lake is doing a good job knocking that phosphorus down. So that's part of what we're testing for out there, and really the goals of the original restoration are still our goals today. We were looking to improve water, we got that. Improve vegetation, we got a ton of vegetation, just the wrong kind. And improved fishery, guys are out there catching perch, making sure that wildlife isn't exposed to lead necessarily, and we're picking up where we left off. So what we think we're working towards today is doing something about our 80% coverage of invasive cattail, which really doesn't do a lot for wildlife or people, and it's a real shame because a lot of people have memories of what Rush Lake was, and the lake of today doesn't look a lot like the lake that people remember.
Well, it was a lake when I first got on it because it had water. Now, as you say, it's 80% cattails. What are we going to do about that?
That's a good question, and that's entirely why we're doing the plan, because there's plenty of tools in the tool bag that you can use to address cattail. A lot of them are things that you can do, go out and spray herbicide, mow it with cutting can have some impact, but one of the aspects of our steering committee is we've got an adaptive management work group where it pulls in people from the DNR, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, our partner from Stevens Point, Wisconsin Wetlands Association, and the feedback that came out of our meeting with what Horicon does to manage Horicon National Wildlife Refuge is you can get a lot more mileage out of controlling things that have a broad impact on the lake. So figuring out what's the proper water level regime to give you more water and better plants. What's the proper way to manage your muskrat population so that they can graze on the cattail and give you more open water and help the lake? And if you can do those two things to support those natural variables of the lake, all those other things like cutting and spraying and burning, those are complementary that can help you, but they're not going to solve your problems for you. And that's what we're doing this year. Collect data, figure out what data we need to do to collect and finish the job next year, and then go out for implementation grants to go make a broad, meaningful impact on Rush Lake.
Well, that involves people, and I am so impressed with what you and your group have done today. Having this open house, people here to educate us, talk to us about where we're going, how they can help. I think a lot more awareness and involvement. And tell us a little bit about the meetings, the open house, and that tour. I think that tour is a great idea.
Yeah, so part of their large-scale planning project, we got the $25,000 DNR grant, is public outreach. And one of the frustrations that I have with my position just being a volunteer president of Rush Lake Watershed is I don't have a lot of this history on the lake. I moved here in 2008, and a lot of people tell me about what it used to be like, and that's all well and good. But the whole point of public outreach is when I talk to a lot of people, they share a lot of things about their memories of the lake, which is great. But today is all about getting people in tune with what we're doing to understand the lake today, and also get on the same page with people about what we want to make it be tomorrow. So the most meaningful thing that we can really get from the public is the completion of our public questionnaire, which runs through November 7th. It can be completed online. There's links at our website, www.rushlakewi.com. But also, if a user just sent an email to our Gmail account, which is rushlakewi@gmail.com, an automated response will send you the questionnaire link, and we'd love to get your input because that's what we're building our lake management plan on. What do the people who use, know, and love Rush Lake want to see us do out there? And how do we develop a plan that can really make a meaningful impact that means something to the people who love it?
Last question. As I drove over here, my wife Suzette and I saw signs, A, B, C, D. Tell us what those mean.
Yeah, so we've got a tour map on the inside that visits 6 different locations around the lake. They're all featuring Rush Lake in different degrees, whether it's restoration at the Tews property, public access at the boat launches, U-line waterfowl production area, or even on Mountain Road. And those letters correspond to the map that we have. So anybody's at the event today, they could pick up the map and take the tour, or if they email that rushlakewi@gmail email address, they'll get a link to download them electronically and they can take that themselves.
Brett, you're doing great work. Your committee is doing great work, and you've shamed the rest of us into doing more work.
Well, I appreciate that, George, but I'm not going to be satisfied until we actually get some implementation grants and start getting something done other than collecting data on the lake. So
I'm grateful that you're on our side.
thank you.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Environment. I'm George Curtis, and we've got Kyle Herrman here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point, probably the best known conservation college in the United States. Do you accept that?
I think I would, yes.
Well, when I've been in Alaska, people have stopped. People who worked for the DNR in Alaska, and before that the Fish and Wildlife, because I started going there before it was a state, they'd say, "Are you familiar with the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point?"
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that one. The College of Natural Resources is one of the biggest programs in the country for undergraduate education, and we pride ourselves on applied knowledge for students getting out in the field and making a difference with natural resources.
You do put people in the field all over the world, don't you?
Absolutely.
And you're involved with Rush Lake. Tell us about the university's involvement and your personal involvement.
Yeah, so about a year and a half ago, I was contacted by the Rush Lake Watershed group, talked about some of their problems that they were having with cattail, and they wanted to know if the university had any expertise and could help out. And I've got a background in wetland restoration and stream restoration, and this seemed like something we were ideally suited to help out with.
Who came with you when you came out to check out Rush Lake?
Well, I would have come out with a graduate student of mine, David Palmy, and I brought an undergraduate, Maureen Cassidy. And the three of us came out and we were doing a lot of field sampling along Rush Lake.
Can you describe the kinds of things you sampled?
Well, we were tasked with understanding what's in the sediment, and we had a couple different goals that we were trying to achieve. One was looking at phosphorus levels. Another one was trying to see what kind of lead shot was present in the sediment, and then also figuring out how much total lead might be in the sediment as well. And then the third thing we were tasked with is understanding the seed bank. So in sediments, in wetlands, there's a viable seed bank, so the seeds of plants will get deposited and gets buried in that sediment. And this can stay viable sometimes for 80 to 100 years. And the hope here is that they've got good, healthy rush still being the dominant plant in that seed bank.
Well, how long did that investigation take place before you had some conclusions?
So at this point, we actually sampled in August of 2019. We got through all of our sites and sampled. And a germination study takes a good 3 to 5 months before we start to be able to identify the plant. So it's ongoing. We're hoping by end of winter to have some better results.
And when you get the conclusions, then how do we go about the fix? I'm sure it costs money.
Yeah, so our hope here is that rush is the dominant plant species in the seed bank. So that means that you still have healthy plants that are waiting to emerge and can try to outcompete cattail. The other side of it is, since cattail has gotten a hold in the Rush Lake, we've got to knock that plant back. We've got to disrupt it. We've got to do some sort of mechanical removal, some sort of herbicide spray, or ideally, what I'm in favor of is a prescribed fire, and try and knock the plant back through a prescribed burn. You then combine that with flooding the soil or the Rush Lake the following year, and that combination of burning the above ground biomass and putting standing water on top of it for an entire year will suffocate the root system, and you'll finally knock cattail out of being the dominant species. Then you have to get into a management regime where you can start to control water levels so that the native plants get a better foothold and they can start to become the dominant plant species.
So it's quite a project. It's not going to help us this duck season.
No, this is going to be a slow process, and what I'm hoping to do is give the citizens of Rush Lake a management plan moving into the future, because this will continue to be an issue. Cattail seeds are going to get blown around in the wind, so cattail will continue to be a problem, or a potential problem. And I want to give some tools to the citizens of Rush Lake so that they can manage their lake more sustainably.
Well, it's awfully nice that you're here for the program today. You answering people's questions. You always had people talking to you and asking you questions. Have you find a lot of concerned citizens who care about Rush Lake?
Absolutely. Everyone wants to see what's best for Rush Lake, and I'm very happy to be here, happy to provide whatever expertise I can. I also get the added bonus of bringing students along and letting them see what this process looks like, understand different stakeholders' values in a complicated
Okay.
scenario like Rush Lake.
Well, and of course there have always been conflicts. People who wanted Rush Lake to be a lake where they could sell frontage, where they could have muskrats in their ditches, they wanted high water. The people who wanted to mow the marsh hay wanted low water. That fight's been going on for 200 years. Is there still that kind of a conflict?
I think that's part of what they're doing today with their open house and running some surveys to try and get stakeholders' values and get a better understanding of what that looks like. And I will be in favor of helping whatever direction the stakeholders want to take their system towards. You're probably never going to be able to answer everyone's desire with a management regime, but the hope is that you can answer the majority of people's desires.
Well, this is going to be expensive, but I have the feeling the contribution of the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point is paid by all taxpayers, not just those of us that have frontage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm here on a Saturday on my own time trying to help out because this is an opportunity for me to give back to the state, and I'm happy to do it.
Well, we're happy you're doing it, and thank you very much for adding to the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. More than 50 years ago, when I came to the Rush Lake area, I thought I knew something about wildlife. I loved wild places and wildlife, and I wanted my children to learn, as I had learned in northern Wisconsin, about the pleasure of working with Mother Nature. I'd also had the privilege of living in Minnesota and Alaska and hunting several states in the Dakotas and Iowa. I had never found a place that had as much natural wildlife reproduction as Rush Lake. And here it was, right next to the town that I worked in. It was ours to improve or destroy. Unfortunately, over the 50-plus years that I have been a part of the watchdog team on Rush Lake, we have failed. It has gone downhill. We've got 80% more cattails. We've got only 20% of the water. Our water is murky. We wouldn't drink it. We wouldn't want our dogs to drink it. We aren't too sure we'd eat the fish out of it. We have really done damage to Rush Lake. Now there's precedent for this. Since the Europeans came into this country, they've done that pretty much everywhere with ditching, dredging, draining, and burning and destroying buffers that are necessary to keep our water clean. Here in the Midwest, water is our biggest asset, and it's precarious. What is the lesson that we have learned? I think we should have learned that we should not affront, offend, and irritate Mother Nature. I think that we should recognize that Mother Nature is in charge, and when we stop doing things for profit and we start going with the flow, we're going to do a lot better. And maybe today is a step in the right direction to restore Rush Lake to what Mother Nature had in mind 50 years ago. That's my opinion. I'm George Curtis.